Looking back, I always thought wedding planning was supposed to be a bit chaotic, but I had no idea just how intense things could get until my own sister, Catherine, found a way to make it personal. I mean, I'd heard horror stories about bridezillas or crazy in-laws, but nothing prepared me for the betrayal that came from my own blood. You see, Catherine took it upon herself to invite my ex to my wedding. My abusive ex, of all people. The man who had left me shattered and barely able to trust anyone again. And the worst part, she didn't even try to hide it. She treated it like it was some harmless prank, as if inviting someone who had wrecked me emotionally was no big deal. Catherine and I had a complicated relationship, to say the least. We grew up close, inseparable even. I have so many fond memories of us giggling late into the night, whispering secrets that felt too important to share with anyone else. We were sisters, yes, but also best friends. However, things took a turn as we entered our teens. Catherine began making questionable choices that she never seemed to have to take responsibility for. Every time she'd mess up, our parents would rush to her side, bailing her out of trouble. She'd lose a job, skip school, fail a class. It didn't matter. They always made excuses, swept things under the rug. And somehow, it became my job to support her, to be the good sister. Meanwhile, Catherine always seemed to get away with everything. As we grew older, the distance between us only grew. She dropped out of college, lost multiple jobs, and constantly bounced from one boyfriend to the next, always expecting someone else to pick up the pieces. I tried to be patient, tried to be understanding. I told myself that she was just struggling to find her way. But after countless incidents, it became clear that Catherine wasn't interested in accountability. She thrived on drama, on creating chaos wherever she went. Then Tyler came into my life. Meeting him felt like finding a safe haven. He was kind, steady, and genuinely cared about me in a way I hadn't experienced before. For the first time, I could picture a future with someone who valued me for who I was. But from the very start, Catherine's jealousy was glaringly obvious. She'd make snide comments, throw subtle digs, and somehow always found a way to put a damper on our relationship. At first, I thought she was just being protective or maybe even joking. But over time, her comments became more pointed, her remarks sharper. She'd say things like, "Are you sure Tyler is really that into you? Or maybe he's just with you because he feels sorry for you." It stung, but I tried to ignore it, hoping that maybe one day she'd just get over it. But her jealousy didn't stop there. I found out months later that she'd been reaching out to my ex behind my back, feeding him details about my life, about Tyler, and even about the wedding plans. She was encouraging him, giving him all the information he needed to worm his way back into my life. I still don't understand why she did it. Was it jealousy, spite, or was it simply her twisted way of trying to protect me from what she saw as a mistake? The day of the wedding finally arrived, and I remember feeling a mixture of excitement and nerves. But that feeling was quickly shattered when I saw my ex standing in the crowd, smug and waiting. I felt sick to my stomach. My hands started shaking and I could barely hold back tears. Here I was, ready to marry the man of my dreams, only to have my past thrown back in my face by my own sister. It was as if she wanted to ruin everything for me, as if my happiness was something she couldn't bear to witness. Standing at the entrance of the venue in my wedding dress, I couldn't believe my eyes. I saw my ex, looking smug, standing with a group of guests. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Catherine had done this deliberately. She'd gone behind my back, invited someone who represented one of the darkest chapters in my life, all on what was supposed to be my happiest day. My heart sank, and it took everything I had to not break down right there. The room seemed to blur as I tried to wrap my head around the betrayal. I remember Tyler coming over, looking concerned, asking me what was wrong, and all I could manage was a whisper. Catherine invited him. Tyler didn't need any explanation to know who him was. He had been there when I first opened up about the pain my ex caused me, about the mental scars that took years to heal. Tyler had held me through the nights when nightmares brought back memories I wished I could forget. And now, here he was, watching me crumble on the day we were supposed to start our lives together. His face shifted from concern to anger as he processed what Catherine had done, but he stayed calm, holding my hand and reassuring me that we'd get through this together. Meanwhile, Catherine was nowhere to be found. It was almost like she wanted to avoid facing the consequences of her actions, slipping into the crowd as if nothing was wrong. I was furious, but more than that, I was hurt. This wasn't just some prank or a misguided attempt to protect me. This was a calculated move, a way for her to remind me that, in her eyes, I didn't deserve happiness if she couldn't have it too. In that moment, I realized just how deeply her jealousy and bitterness ran. It wasn't just about me or Tyler. It was about her need to control, to be the center of attention, even if it meant hurting the people closest to her. When I finally gathered enough strength, I walked over to confront her. I couldn't believe I was about to have this confrontation at my own wedding, but I needed answers. I found her chatting with friends as if nothing had happened. The sight of her smiling, enjoying herself, made my blood boil. I pulled her aside, my voice low but trembling with emotion. "Why did you invite him? Do you have any idea what you've done?" She looked at me with feigned innocence, shrugging her shoulders like it was no big deal. "Oh, come on. I thought it would be interesting. Besides, you two were together for a long time. I thought maybe seeing him again would remind you of old times." Her tone was dismissive, almost mocking, as if my feelings meant nothing to her. Old times. I nearly choked on the words. "You know exactly what he put me through, Catherine. You know how hard it was to move on, to trust again. And you still thought it would be interesting to bring him here. This is my wedding, not some show for your entertainment." But she just rolled her eyes, saying, "Maybe I'm just looking out for you. You're rushing into this whole marriage thing, and I don't want you to end up regretting it. Besides, Tyler isn't exactly. Well, he's not what I would have chosen for you." That was it. All the years of putting up with her jealousy, her meddling, her complete disregard for anyone but herself, it all came to a head in that moment. I realized that Catherine wasn't just being a difficult sister. She was actively trying to sabotage my happiness. Whether it was jealousy or her twisted idea of what was best for me, I knew one thing. I couldn't let her keep controlling my life. I walked away from her, my heart pounding, but I knew I had to push her actions aside to focus on what mattered. My wedding to Tyler. I looked at him across the room, saw the support in his eyes, and knew that he was my future. I couldn't let Catherine ruin that. For the rest of the day, I did my best to ignore her, but every time I caught sight of my ex lurking in the background, a fresh wave of anger and betrayal washed over me. Catherine had made her choice, and it was clear she didn't care how much pain she caused as long as she got to feel powerful, in control. But I also realized something. I was done letting her have that control over me. The honeymoon period was barely over before the full weight of what Catherine had done started to sink in. It wasn't just a wedding day disaster that I could forgive and forget. This was a calculated act of sabotage. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that her actions went far beyond mere sisterly jealousy. She had lied, manipulated, and even dragged in someone who had been a dark part of my life, all to hurt me on one of the most important days of my life. After a few days, I decided to confront her properly. I needed answers, not just the sarcastic, deflective responses she'd given me on my wedding day. So I reached out, setting up a time to meet. But when I walked into the cafe, I wasn't sure if I'd get the truth from her or another round of excuses. I sat across from her, taking in her casual appearance. She was all smiles, as if the whole thing was one big misunderstanding. I wasted no time getting to the point, and my voice was firm as I asked, "Why did you do it, Catherine? Really, I want to know. And don't give me some excuse about looking out for Maeve." She sipped her coffee, unfazed by my directness. "Oh, come on," she replied with a smirk. "It's not like I ruined your life. Besides, you're always so dramatic. I just thought it'd be interesting. And who knows, maybe you'd see things differently if you gave him another chance." Another chance? I was dumbfounded. "He was abusive, Catherine. You know what he put me through. You've heard the stories. You were there when I was picking up the pieces. And you thought it'd be interesting to invite him to my wedding." Catherine laughed, a hollow sound that grated on my nerves. "You always make things sound so much worse than they were. He wasn't that bad. Honestly, I think you overreacted about the whole thing." At that moment, I realized just how deeply rooted her denial was, not only about my experiences but about the boundaries she'd crossed. And as I pushed her, bit by bit, her true motives began to unravel in front of me. "You've always been the golden child," she spat, her voice suddenly sharp, dripping with years of resentment. "Mom and Dad never cared when I failed, but every little thing you did was celebrated. And now you get this perfect guy and the perfect life. It's just not fair." It was like a punch to the gut. All these years I'd known there was tension between us, but I had no idea it ran this deep. The jealousy, the resentment. She wasn't just unhappy with her own life. She was furious that mine was turning out the way it was. "So, you did this to ruin my wedding? Because you were jealous?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe I just wanted you to see that not everything is about you and your perfect little life. Sometimes people like me deserve a little happiness, too." "People like you," I echoed, feeling a strange mix of pity and anger. "Catherine, if you wanted happiness, why wouldn't you just build your own life instead of trying to tear mine apart?" But she just scoffed, dismissing my words as if they were meaningless. It was clear that, in her mind, she was the victim of my so-called perfect life. She didn't see her own flaws or her actions. She only saw what she thought she deserved and how I somehow stood in the way of it. I left that meeting feeling shattered, like the person I'd once considered my sister was a stranger I barely recognized. It wasn't just the betrayal anymore. It was the realization that she genuinely didn't care how much pain she caused, as long as she got what she wanted. She saw my happiness as a threat, something she had to undermine to feel better about her own choices. But the story didn't end there. I was determined to make sure that the fallout of her actions wouldn't spill over into the rest of my life. I couldn't let her drag me down any further, and that meant exposing her for who she truly was. Not just to my family, but to everyone who thought they knew her. I began reaching out to people who'd been involved in her life. Old friends, co-workers, even her on and off boyfriend, Ryan. What I found was a pattern. A trail of manipulation, deceit, and selfish decisions that seemed to define every relationship she'd ever had. Catherine's actions weren't just a one-time thing. They were a way of life, and everyone around her had paid the price in one way or another. Ryan was the first to open up about what Catherine had done to him. He described how she'd twisted his words, spread rumors about him, and even lied to his friends and family to make herself look like the victim whenever they fought. He tried to break things off multiple times, but every time he did, she'd find a way to worm her way back into his life, convincing him that he was the one who was wrong. And then he told me something that made my blood run cold. Apparently, Catherine had gone to her workplace and spun an elaborate story about her awful family, and how we'd all been unsupportive of her. She'd painted herself as this misunderstood soul, someone who'd been mistreated and overlooked by everyone around her. It was her way of justifying all the things she'd done, of painting herself as the hero of her own twisted story. Hearing all of this, I realized that her actions at my wedding were just the tip of the iceberg. She wasn't just lashing out at me. She was trying to rewrite her entire life narrative, blaming everyone else for her failures. And she didn't care how many people she hurt along the way. It was time to put an end to it. Ryan and I made a plan. If she wanted to keep up this act, we'd expose the truth, once and for all. And maybe, just maybe, she'd finally face the consequences of her actions. Once Ryan and I decided to expose Catherine's lies, we knew it wasn't going to be easy. Confronting her meant not only unraveling her twisted narratives, but also putting ourselves in the crossfire. This wasn't just about me or Ryan anymore. Catherine's lies had spread into her workplace and affected people who thought she was trustworthy. If we didn't step forward, she'd keep hurting everyone around her, just as she had hurt me. We started by gathering evidence. Messages, screenshots, and notes from people she had lied to or manipulated. Ryan reached out to her co-workers, who were initially hesitant to say much. But once they realized he was serious, stories started pouring in. It turned out that Catherine's office life was just as chaotic as her personal one. One of her co-workers, Laura, confided in us that Catherine had been submitting fraudulent expense reports, claiming reimbursements for business trips that she never took. Laura had suspected something was wrong but had been too afraid to speak up, fearing Catherine's wrath. "She has a way of twisting things," Laura told us, her voice trembling slightly. "If I ever questioned her, she'd make me feel like I was the one in the wrong." We gathered more stories like this, and slowly, a disturbing picture began to form. Catherine had been bending the rules at work, manipulating her colleagues, and even pitting them against each other to maintain control. It was no wonder that the people around her were afraid to speak out. She had built an empire of intimidation. Armed with all this evidence, Ryan and I decided to bring it to her company's HR department. We knew it was a bold move, and I half expected them to brush us off. But to my surprise, they listened carefully. It seemed that they had already noticed some of Catherine's suspicious activities, but had lacked solid evidence to take action. With our documentation, they now had grounds to conduct a full investigation. What followed was a whirlwind of events that left Catherine scrambling. The company launched a thorough audit of her work, diving deep into her expense reports, emails, and communications with clients. Ryan and I stayed out of it as much as possible, knowing that we had done what we could. Now, it was up to the company to hold her accountable. As the investigation progressed, Catherine's behavior became even more erratic. She began lashing out at everyone around her, accusing them of betrayal and conspiracy. Her stories became increasingly paranoid, each one painting her as a victim of some elaborate scheme. She even tried to turn our parents against me, claiming that I was out to ruin her life out of spite. Our mother, always quick to defend Catherine, initially bought into her narrative. "Maybe this is all a misunderstanding," she'd say, trying to convince me to drop the whole thing. But my father wasn't so easily swayed. He had seen Catherine's behavior escalate over the years, and he knew that something had to be done before she dragged the entire family's reputation through the mud. At home, the tension was unbearable. My mother continued to make excuses for Catherine, clinging to the belief that her little girl could never do anything wrong. She insisted that I should reach out, that I should try to understand Catherine's perspective. But I couldn't ignore the pain she had caused me, or the trail of lies and manipulation she had left in her wake. My father, for once, took my side. He told me that I had done the right thing by exposing her, that sometimes the truth hurts but has to be faced. Catherine's unraveling reached a breaking point when the company concluded their audit. They found that she had falsified thousands of dollars in expenses, redirected company resources for personal use, and engaged in multiple violations of corporate policy. HR didn't hold back in delivering their decision. She was terminated effective immediately, and they informed her that she might face legal action depending on the outcome of further investigations. The fallout was immediate. Catherine's carefully crafted persona began to crumble as people around her realized the extent of her deceit. Friends and family who had once believed in her stories started questioning everything she'd ever told them. Some distanced themselves quietly, while others were more vocal, confronting her about the lies she had spread. Despite everything, Catherine doubled down, refusing to accept any responsibility. She painted herself as the ultimate victim, someone who had been set up by everyone she'd ever trusted. Her social media accounts became an endless stream of rants and accusations, each one more delusional than the last. She claimed that her termination was a conspiracy, that everyone, from her co-workers to her own family, had been out to get her. For me, it was painful to watch, but also a strange relief. I had spent so long trying to figure out why she had done the things she did, why she felt the need to tear others down. But seeing her spiral like this, refusing to accept even a shred of responsibility, I realized that I couldn't help her. No one could. She had built this life of lies brick by brick, and now it was all coming down around her. Ryan, meanwhile, felt a similar mix of emotions. In some ways, he was relieved to be free of her influence. He no longer had to deal with her manipulations, her constant need for attention. He started dating someone new, someone who treated him with the respect and kindness that Catherine never had. And for the first time in years, he seemed genuinely happy. My family, however, was still reeling from the aftermath. My mother was devastated, unable to reconcile the truth with the image she had of Herb's sweet daughter. She clung to the hope that Catherine would somehow change, that this would be her wake-up call. But my father and I knew better. Catherine had been given chance after chance to turn her life around, to own up to her mistakes. And every time, she had chosen to dig herself deeper into her web of lies. In the weeks that followed, Catherine's life continued to unravel. With no job, no support, and a tarnished reputation, she found herself isolated and struggling. Friends who had once tolerated her behavior now saw her for who she truly was. Even her former colleagues, who had once been intimidated by her, began speaking out about the ways she had mistreated them. I tried to move on, focusing on building my life with Tyler and putting the pain of my sister's betrayal behind me. But there was a part of me that couldn't shake the sadness, the sense of loss. Not for the person Catherine had become, but for the sister I thought I once had. The sister who was supposed to be my friend, my ally, the one who would stand by me no matter what. As difficult as it was, I knew that distancing myself from her was the healthiest choice I could make. I had to protect myself, my happiness, and my new life with Tyler from her toxic influence. I couldn't let her pull me back into her world of lies and deceit. And slowly, I began to find peace in that decision. Catherine's downfall had been painful, but in the end, it brought a sense of closure. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences. And while it hurt to lose the person I thought she was, I found comfort in the family and friends who stood by me, who saw through her lies and chose to support me through it all. But Catherine wasn't quite done yet. Just when I thought I could finally move forward, she found one last way to drag me back into her chaotic world. Just when I thought we'd reached the end of Catherine's influence, she found one last way to claw her way back into our lives. It happened out of the blue. A knock on my door late one evening. I had just settled in, thinking of how peaceful life had been since cutting ties. But when I opened the door, my heart dropped. There she was, standing there, eyes red, makeup smudged, and looking more desperate than I'd ever seen her. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice wavering. Every instinct told me to close the door and walk away, but a small part of me, that part that remembered the sister I grew up with, hesitated. She looked genuinely broken, a stark contrast to the manipulative, ruthless person she had become. Against my better judgment, I let her in. She didn't waste any time diving into her usual stories of woe. She told me how life had become unbearable, how everyone had turned against her. She described in vivid detail how the company wrongfully fired her, how her friends were traitors, and how even our own family had abandoned her in her darkest hour. At first, I listened in silence, letting her pour out her version of events. But as the minutes ticked by, I felt a familiar resentment bubbling up. Here she was, once again painting herself as the eternal victim, refusing to acknowledge even a fraction of the blame. I realized then that she hadn't come to apologize or make amends. She was here to manipulate me into giving her another chance. "Catherine, you have to stop," I finally said, interrupting her rant. "This isn't anyone else's fault. It's yours. You lied, you manipulated, and now you're facing the consequences. It's time you own up to what you did." My words seemed to stun her into silence. For a brief moment, I thought I saw a flicker of remorse in her eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a look of sheer contempt. She scoffed, crossing her arms defiantly. "So, you're really just going to leave me like everyone else?" she spat, her tone icy. "Some sister you are." I shook my head, feeling a pang of sadness. "I didn't leave you, Catherine. You left me the moment you decided to betray me. I can't keep sacrificing my happiness and my peace for someone who doesn't even respect me." She glared at me, and I could feel the tension mounting. It was as if all the resentment she'd been harboring finally reached its boiling point. But instead of lashing out, she laughed, a hollow, bitter sound that sent a chill down my spine. "Fine," she said, standing up abruptly. "If that's how you want it, don't come crying to me when your perfect little life falls apart." With that, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I stood there for a moment, processing what had just happened. Part of me wondered if I'd made a mistake, if I should have handled it differently. But deep down, I knew there was no reasoning with her. She had made her choice, and I had made mine. For few days things were quiet. I tried to put the encounter behind me, focusing on my life with Tyler and looking forward to the future. But Catherine's parting words lingered, a dark shadow over my thoughts. Then, one evening, my phone started buzzing with notifications. Friends, family members, even acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in years were reaching out, asking if I was okay. Confused, I checked social media, and my heart sank. Catherine had launched a full-blown smear campaign against me, sharing twisted stories of our relationship and painting me as the villain who had abandoned her. Her posts were full of accusations, each more outrageous than the last. She claimed I had stolen her life, that I was the reason for all her failures. She even went as far as to suggest that Tyler and I had plotted to sabotage her, that we were somehow responsible for her downfall. Seeing these lies spread online was like a punch to the gut. My friends and family knew the truth, but I couldn't help feeling humiliated. Catherine was determined to drag my name through the mud, to make me suffer simply because she couldn't handle the truth of her own actions. I thought about confronting her, about defending myself publicly. But then I realized something important. Anyone who knew me, who truly knew my character, wouldn't believe her lies. Her words were just that, words. She had no power over my life unless I allowed her to. So I took a deep breath and made the decision to let it go. I blocked her on all platforms, removed myself from any circles that still connected us, and focused on the people who supported me. I knew it wouldn't be easy, and that the sting of her betrayal would take time to heal. But for the first time in a long time I felt a sense of freedom. In the weeks that followed, I found solace in the small moments of peace that had been missing for so long. Tyler and I grew closer, unburdened by the toxic influence that had hung over us. My family, though still saddened by the rift, respected my decision and offered unwavering support. Catherine's campaign eventually fizzled out as people saw through her lies. Without the drama to fuel her, she faded into the background, a shadow of the person she once was. She continued to spiral, clinging to her anger and bitterness, but I had finally broken free. Looking back, I realized that Catherine's actions, painful as they were, had taught me a valuable lesson about self-respect and boundaries. Sometimes the people we think we're closest to turn out to be the ones who harm us the most. And sometimes the healthiest choice we can make is to walk away, no matter how hard it is. In the end, Catherine was her own worst enemy. She had tried to sabotage my life, but in doing so, she had destroyed her own. And as I moved forward, I knew that I was finally free from her influence, ready to build a life of peace and happiness, without her shadow looming over me. After that night when Catherine showed up at my door, I knew deep down that it was probably the last time she'd ever try to worm her way back into my life. After her online smear campaign, I wasn't sure I even wanted to see my sister again. All those years of our complicated relationship, and I'd always thought there was some deep, irreplaceable bond between us. But after everything that had unfolded, it became painfully clear that the bond was one-sided. Catherine had always cared only about herself, and her self-absorption had burned everything around her. I began to rebuild my life. My family stayed by my side, offering support in a way that I never could have imagined before. But it wasn't just the support that made me feel better. It was the realization that I was free from the toxic weight Catherine had carried into every part of my world. Her lies, her manipulation, her need for control, gone. Finally, I could breathe. I thought back on the series of events that led us here. The way she'd sabotaged my relationship with Tyler, the way she tried to ruin my wedding day by inviting my abusive ex, and the way she tried to tear down everything I had worked for, all in the name of jealousy and revenge. Catherine's actions weren't just random bursts of rage. They were calculated, and every move she made only drove her further into her own spiral. But looking back, I had learned something invaluable. How far we can go when we're forced to choose ourselves over the chaos that others bring into our lives. I had let my loyalty to Catherine blind me to her true nature, and now I understood the importance of setting boundaries, even with family. For a long time I had been scared to walk away, scared of the consequences, scared of losing what little we had left of the sisterly bond we once shared. but there was no real bond anymore. Just a trail of hurt and betrayal. The family, too, had shifted in a way I never expected. My parents were still divided, but it was becoming clearer to everyone that they had to stop enabling Catherine. No one could pretend that everything was fine anymore. And in that shift, I saw something powerful. My parents were finally seeing Catherine for who she truly was. My mother had always been protective, almost to a fault, and my father had always been distant, believing Catherine could redeem herself. But after everything, they both began to understand. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to let them face the consequences of their actions, without protection, without excuses. As for me, I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I realized that I'd spent too many years looking backward, trying to fix something that was broken from the start. But fixing it wasn't the answer. Letting it go was. That was the hardest part of all. Not just forgiving Catherine, but forgiving myself for letting things get this far. I had let her control the narrative of our relationship for too long, and in doing so, I had lost sight of what I truly needed: peace. Tyler and I are in a good place now. We've worked through the cracks that Catherine tried to wedge between us, and we're stronger for it. We've grown so much together, and while it was painful at the time, the lessons we learned about trust, resilience, and the importance of mutual respect were worth the heartache. I've learned to protect my peace, to stand firm in my decisions, and to never let anyone, family included, try to sabotage my happiness again. Catherine, on the other hand, continues to spiral. I'm sure she'll find someone else to blame for her downfall, someone else to manipulate and control. But as I sit here now, looking back on everything, I know that she can't reach me anymore. That chapter is closed. I've put my own happiness first, and it's been the most empowering decision I've ever made. As for what I've learned, life is too short to keep toxic people around, even if they're family. There's a difference between forgiveness and enabling, and the hardest thing is knowing when to walk away for your own mental and emotional well-being. You can't fix someone who doesn't want to be fixed, and sometimes, the best way to show love is by letting them face their own consequences. I'm finally free.